For 10 years, the world believed the Marlowe twins were lost in silence, blind, mute, and unreachable. Doctors gave up. Their father surrendered, and the mansion became a cage of control. But when a new housekeeper walked through those gates, one glance changed everything. Secrets buried for a decade began to unravel, and the truth that followed would shatter the walls of power forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. For 10 years, people believed that Adrian Marlowe's twin daughters were lost in silence. The world outside his grand estate whispered about them, but no one knew the truth. Hidden away behind tall iron gates, Lila and Sophia moved like shadows. They were quiet, still, and almost invisible. Doctors had declared them hopeless cases. They said the girls suffered from irreversible conditions that kept them from speaking or connecting. Adrian, worn down by grief and guilt, accepted their judgment. His wife had died a decade earlier, leaving him alone with newborn daughters he never truly came to know. Adrian buried himself in work, building technology that promised progress for the world, while inside his home, his own family slipped deeper into silence. Every morning, he sat at the head of a long dining table, staring at untouched plates. Two empty chairs sat across from him, reminders of what he had lost and what he feared he could never have. Beatrice Marlowe, Adrian's mother, had stepped in quickly after tragedy struck. She was a woman of authority, known in elite medical circles, admired for her sharp mind and relentless drive. Outside the mansion, she was praised as a pioneer in children's health. Inside the mansion, her word became law. She designed every routine, approved every prescription, and ensured the girls were never seen without supervision. She insisted the medication kept them calm and safe. Adrian, fragile in his grief, never questioned her. The girls' world was not filled with laughter or play. It was filled with routines written on laminated charts, schedules taped to walls, and cabinets locked with medicines no one dared to question. Lila and Sophia obeyed every instruction without hesitation. They walked when told to walk. They sat when told to sit. They stared ahead without expression, never resisting, never rebelling. Their obedience was too perfect, and their silence too heavy. Then came Mariah Santos. She arrived quietly, just another name on the staff list. She carried no medical degree and no special titles, only a reputation for diligence and a heart that noticed details others ignored. To Adrian, she was just another housekeeper hired to keep the estate running. To Beatrice, she was a pair of hands to follow orders. But Mariah was more than that. From her first day, she sensed the difference in the Marlowe home. The silence was not peaceful. It was forced. It was as if the air itself had been taught not to move. The staff spoke only in whispers. The halls echoed with emptiness, not life. And when Mariah first saw the twins being led by their nurse down the staircase, she noticed something that unsettled her. Lila and Sophia looked identical, their faces pale and their movements mechanical. Yet, in that single moment, Mariah caught something small. Lila's foot hesitated on the step, just for half a second, as if her body had made a decision before her mind pulled it back into stillness. Mariah paused, mop in hand, staring. The nurse's sharp look warned her not to linger, so she lowered her eyes and continued her work. But the image stayed with her. That night, she lay awake in her small quarters, thinking. She had seen children in wealthy homes before, some joyful, some restless, some spoiled, but never children so empty, so trained into silence. The Marlowe estate did not feel like a home. It felt like a system, polished and precise, but cold. Adrian moved through the halls like a ghost of himself. He watched his daughters through cameras, but rarely stood by their side. He loved them, but his love had grown quiet, numbed by years of listening to Beatrice's confident voice, telling him this was the only way. Yet Mariah, with her quiet persistence, noticed what others did not. She noticed the way Sophia's hand twitched near a toy before she pulled it back. She noticed how the girl's eyes followed patterns, not randomly, but with intention. She noticed that some days they were slower, heavier, as though weighted down by unseen chains. She said nothing. She was new, and she had no authority. But inside, her thoughts grew louder. What if the silence of these children was not a condition? What if it was something else? The Marlowe mansion had many secrets, and Mariah could already feel that she was walking into the heart of one. And so the hidden silence continued. Lila and Sophia sat in their therapy room like fragile statues, watched over by nurses and bound by the rules of their grandmother. Adrian remained distant, consumed by sorrow and trust misplaced in the wrong hands. But Mariah carried a question that would not leave her. What if these girls were not broken at all? That question was only the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and Mariah Santos began to see what others overlooked inside the Marlowe estate. To the outside world, everything looked flawless. The staff worked like parts of a well-oiled machine. Every task was timed, every hallway spotless, every door locked at the right hour. But to Mariah, the perfection felt unnatural, too controlled, too rehearsed. She began to notice the girls more closely. Lila and Sophia moved through their routines without hesitation. They walked in step, sat in silence, and ate without a word. Their faces rarely shifted, as though emotions had been erased. Yet Mariah's eyes were trained to see what was small and hidden. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves near the playroom, Mariah dropped a wooden block onto the floor. The sound echoed in the quiet space. Lila, sitting nearby, turned her head. She didn't just look toward the sound. She looked at Mariah. Their eyes met for a brief, flickering second. Then the girl looked away quickly, almost as if she had been caught. Mariah's breath caught in her throat. That single glance carried awareness. It was not the empty stare of someone lost. It was the sharp, quick look of someone alive, someone who understood more than others believed. The nurse appeared seconds later, ushering the girls away. Her voice was polite, but firm. "Please don't distract them, Miss Santos. Their balance depends on routine." Mariah nodded, but the thought stayed with her long after the hall was empty. That night in her small room above the garage, Mariah opened a notebook. She began writing down everything she noticed, the hesitations, the eye movements, the rare flickers of expression. She wrote about the medications delivered weekly in sealed boxes, the bottles she once glimpsed on a counter labeled with heavy dosages. She wrote about the way the girls seemed slower on certain days, their limbs heavy, their gazes distant. The more she observed, the more certain she became. This wasn't natural silence. It was shaped, enforced, and maintained. Beatrice Marlowe kept her presence felt across the estate. She moved with authority, her voice calm but commanding. One morning, Mariah was summoned to Beatrice's private sitting room. The air inside was heavy, filled with the smell of polished wood and fresh paper. "I hear you've been lingering in the hallways," Beatrice said, not looking up from her file. Her tone was sharp, though wrapped in courtesy. Mariah kept her voice steady. "I am still learning the rhythm of the house. Sometimes I pause too long." Beatrice looked up, her eyes cold and assessing. "The children require precision. One disruption can undo months of progress. You must stay on task. Do you understand?" Mariah nodded. "Of course." But inside, something stirred. She understood this was not about cleaning schedules. It was a warning. ... After that meeting, Mariah became more cautious, but also more determined. She began watching for patterns behind the patterns. When the deliveries of medicine were late, the girls' movements changed. Leela tapped her fingers lightly on the table, almost like a rhythm. Sophia tilted her head toward Mariah when she entered the room, as if testing if she would respond. Each sign was small, but they built into a picture that no diagnosis could explain. The twins were not lost in silence. They were trapped in it. The staff seemed aware too, though they never spoke of it. Their greetings were short, their eyes always wary. Mariah realized they were not just following orders. They were afraid. She tested her theory quietly. While wiping the kitchen counter, she placed a small toy on the edge of the table, slightly out of place. When she returned later, the toy had been moved back neatly to its original position. Another day, she whispered softly while passing the therapy room, "You're not alone." She didn't expect an answer, but Sophia blinked, her gaze flickering in recognition, before turning her head as if hiding the response. These small cracks in control grew clearer to Mariah each day. The silence around the girls was no longer convincing. It was breaking. Still, she spoke to no one. She knew Beatrice was watching. She knew one wrong word could end her position at the estate. But her notebook filled with observations, her quiet proof that something deeper was happening. And though she had no power yet, Mariah carried a growing certainty. The twins were not what they appeared to be. The truth was pushing against the walls of the mansion, waiting for the moment it would finally break free. For the first time in 10 years, someone had noticed. Someone was listening, and Mariah was determined not to look away. The turning point came quietly, almost by accident. One Monday morning, the usual delivery of medications did not arrive at the Marlowe estate. A clerical error at the pharmacy caused a delay. For years, the bottles had arrived like clockwork, controlling the rhythm of Leela and Sophia's lives. But now, for the first time in memory, the routine cracked. Mariah Santos noticed the change before anyone else. As she entered the therapy room under the pretense of cleaning, she expected to see the familiar sight of two motionless figures. Instead, she found Leela shifting her weight on the carpet, her eyes scanning the bookshelf. Sophia sat beside a puzzle box, her fingers tapping with a rhythm that felt deliberate, not random. Mariah froze. The girls were different. There was no lifeless stillness, no heavy glaze in their eyes. They looked present. She didn't speak, didn't rush. She simply lowered herself to the floor and sat across from them. Leela noticed her first. Her gaze lingered longer than ever before. It was not the blank stare of silence, but the cautious acknowledgement of recognition. Mariah whispered softly, "Hi." Sophia blinked, her lips trembling as if she wanted to form a sound. She looked at her sister, then back at Mariah. For several minutes, nothing more happened. But then, in a voice so faint it was nearly lost in the air, Sophia whispered, "Grandma gives the pills." The words hit Mariah like a thunderclap. Her hands shook, but she kept her voice calm. "What did you say?" Before she could ask again, Leela reached for Sophia's hand, steadying her. Her own voice trembled, strained but clear enough to understand. "She said we'd be punished if we ever talked." Mariah's chest tightened. She leaned closer, whispering, "You are safe. You can talk to me." In that moment, the silence that had ruled the mansion for 10 years fractured. These were not children without awareness. They had been forced into silence, medicated into stillness, and taught to fear their own voices. Later that day, Mariah could no longer hold the secret. She walked into Adrian Marlowe's office with urgency. His head lifted from his tablet, startled by the look on her face. "We need to talk," she said firmly. Adrian frowned. "Is something wrong with the girls?" Mariah placed her folded note on his desk. It read, "They spoke today." Adrian shook his head in disbelief. "That's not possible. The doctor said," Mariah interrupted, her voice steady. "You don't understand. I was there." Sophia whispered. Lila confirmed. They looked at me, and they spoke. Adrian rose to his feet, pacing. "Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe it was some involuntary sound." "No," Mariah said, her eyes unblinking. "They told me about the pills, about your mother. They are not what you've been led to believe." The words struck him. He sank into his chair, his hands pressed to his face. For years, he had accepted Beatrice's authority, her polished explanations, her medical expertise. Now, doubt pierced through him. Mariah leaned forward. "Go see them yourself. Don't ask questions, just look at them." Moments later, Adrian followed her to the twins' room. Leela was building a tower of blocks. Sophia sat nearby with a notebook Mariah had left days earlier. When their father entered, they stopped. For the first time in a decade, both girls turned and held his gaze. Adrian fell to his knees, overcome. Leela dropped her block, walked to him, and wrapped her small arms around his neck. Sophia followed, pressing close to his side. Adrian didn't speak. He simply held them, tears falling silently, realizing how much he had missed, how much had been hidden from him. That evening, Adrian confronted his mother. He found Beatrice in the solarium, sipping tea with her usual calm elegance. "They spoke," he said simp. She glanced up, unshaken. "Children mimic. You know how their condition works." Adrian's voice hardened. "No, they told Mariah about the pills. They know it's you. They know what you've done." For the first time, Beatrice's expression faltered, her polished mask slipping. Adrian stood tall, his voice breaking but resolute. "The mistake was trusting you blindly. That ends now." He walked out, leaving her seated in silence. The mansion, once ruled by strict control and medication, had begun to change. For the first time, Adrian saw his daughters not as broken, but as survivors. Mariah had seen what no one else dared to see, and together they had opened the door to the truth. The silence of the Marlowe estate was ending. The awakening had begun. The Marlowe estate no longer carried the same heavy silence. In the weeks after the truth came out, the air itself felt lighter. The doors that had once closed like prison gates now opened freely. The rooms that had been filled with clinical charts and locked cabinets slowly became spaces of life and warmth. Adrian Marlowe moved with a new resolve. He no longer hid behind meetings and reports. Each morning, he sat with Leela and Sophia at the breakfast table. At first, the conversations were simple, small nods, brief words, quiet gestures. But slowly, day by day, the silence loosened its grip. The girls began to hum while eating, sometimes whisper to each other, sometimes even smile. To Adrian, these small moments were greater victories than any business deal he had ever signed. Mariah Santos stayed close. She was no longer just a housekeeper. She had become part of the family. Her patience, her steady watch, and her quiet courage had given the girls a safe path to express themselves. She continued her routine tasks, but everything she did now carried purpose. While cleaning the playroom, she left art supplies on the table. While arranging books, she placed stories with bright illustrations in reach. Each gesture was an invitation, and the twins began to accept them. One afternoon, Mariah stepped into the garden with the girls. For the first time in years, the gates were opened wide. Leela picked up a soccer ball and rolled it gently across the grass. Sophia bent down to gather flowers, her hands trembling, but steady enough to hold the stems. Adrian stood nearby, watching as though he might break the moment by breathing too loudly. But the moment didn't break, it grew. The girls were not shadows anymore. They were children rediscovering freedom. That evening, Adrian gathered the staff. He explained that things would be different now. No more sedatives. No more silence treated as medicine. Every person in the house would be expected to support the Burrells not with control, but with patience. Some staff left, unwilling to face the change, but those who remained began to see the estate with new eyes. Beatrice Marlowe, once the force that ruled every corner of the household, was gone. She left quietly, her departure unmarked by speeches or farewells. Her influence had collapsed, not with noise, but with truth, and in her absence, the house finally breathed. As the weeks turned into months, Lila and Sophia began to surprise everyone. They no longer drifted silently from room to room. They engaged. They reached for crayons and filled pages with colors. They tapped rhythms on the table that turned into playful games. One morning, Lila tugged Adrian's sleeve and whispered, "Stay." It was only one word, but it shook him deeply. He promised her he would, and this time, he meant it. Sophia, quieter, but no less determined, found her voice through drawing. She filled notebook after notebook with pictures of trees, houses, and people holding hands. She even drew the family together, herself, Leela, Adrian, and Mariah. When she showed it to her father, he wept, not from grief, but from gratitude. Mariah continued to record everything in her notebook, but now her notes were filled with progress instead of suspicion. She documented the first words, the first smiles, the first genuine laugh that echoed through the hallways. Every entry was proof that the silence had not been permanent. Life at the estate was not perfect, but it was real. Meals were sometimes messy, mornings were sometimes loud, but those imperfections were signs of growth. They were signs of life. Adrian changed too. He adjusted his work, stepping back from the constant demands of his company. He spent afternoons in the garden, evenings reading bedtime stories, mornings walking the girls down the driveway just to feel the sun on their faces. For the first time, he was not only a provider, he was a father. One Sunday afternoon, the family gathered beneath the tall oak tree in the yard. Mariah spread a blanket, while Adrian set down a basket of food. Lila kicked her soccer ball across the grass, laughing. Sophia knelt with chalk, drawing wide shapes on the stone path. Slowly, with shaky letters, she wrote 3 words, "We are here." Adrian knelt beside her, his voice breaking as he read the message aloud. "Yes, you are," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. Mariah placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes wet but steady. The words stayed with them. They became more than chalk on the ground. They became the symbol of a new life, a declaration that the silence had ended. Inside the house, Adrian framed the phrase and placed it on the wall outside the girls' bedrooms. Below it, a small plaque read, "The day we began again." The Marlowe estate was no longer defined by silence or control. It was defined by connection, by courage, and by truth. And as laughter echoed through the halls and voices slowly returned to life, it was clear the story of the Marlowe family had only just begun. And so, the silence that once ruled the Marlowe estate was finally broken. The twins had found their voices, a father had reclaimed his children, and a new family had risen from the shadows of control. This was not the end, but the beginning of a life filled with truth, love, and freedom.